Christ is risen. Indeed, he is risen. Alleluia. Welcome to Veritatis Vox, a new channel devoted to being a voice for the voice of truth, who is our Lord Jesus Christ, risen from the dead. My name is Matt Gaspers, and I'm very happy to be joined today by two outstanding gentlemen, Brian Mershon, who I got to know and collaborated with during my tenure at Catholic Family News, and also Alex Begin. Do I pronounce that correctly? Began, okay, apologies. Who is a commercial real estate developer, and he's been organizing Latin masses in the Metro Detroit area for many years, training priests across North America on how to celebrate the TLM. And he is also the host and executive producer of Extraordinary Faith, a 23-part series on EWTN about traditional Catholicism. So we got some heavy hitters today. Brian is a longtime journalist, also has a master's in theology. And today we are here to talk about unfortunately, the sad situation in the Archdiocese of Detroit concerning the state of the traditional Latin Mass, basically some additional cancellations, crackdown. So welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
So I wanted to begin with, actually, providentially, first of all, it's very providential we're having this discussion today, May 5th, the traditional feast of St. Pius V, who is, of course, the champion of the traditional Roman Rite, who, as Archbishop Lefebvre famously put it, basically canonized the traditional rite of the Roman Church in 1570 after the Council of Trent, and preserved that. We have it, the Missal of 1570 has very few changes compared to throughout the centuries, just added feast days and some minor tweaks here and there, but substantially it's the same rite. It's the same Mass today as it was in 1570, and 1570 was a restoration of the rite according to the Holy Fathers, which is what Pius V said in Quo Primum. So that's providence number one. Number two, the New York Times actually has an article that I want to put up on the screen here for everybody to see. They are reporting on the very subject that we are going to be discussing today. So let me see if I can put this up here and see if it displays for you all. There we go. So this is today, New York Times, what will the new Pope do about the Latin Mass? So thanks be to God that it's getting this coverage from the New York Times. And Alex, it sounds like you know the lady who came. Were you maybe even interviewed for this piece?
Briefly, I provided one piece of information for this story, but she had been here a little over a year ago for a longer piece, and that addressed the growth of the traditional Mass nationally, but especially in Detroit. So nice. Ruth Graham is a sympathetic reporter.
That's awesome. And let's see, the caption for this top photo says, the traditional Latin Mass at the Sweetest Heart of Mary Church in Detroit on the Sunday after Easter. That's a magnificent altar. That's a beautiful church. Love to visit someday. So basically what our main topic today is what was announced, a few weeks ago, and I'll put this text up on the screen so everybody can see as well. An announcement was made by the Archdiocese. Let me get this up on the screen so everybody can follow along here. An update on Traditionis Custodes, or the infamous guardians of tradition, so-called, that Pope Francis, God rest his soul, released in July of 2021. So I'll go ahead and read this text, and here, let me put a link in the live chat if anybody's interested in pulling it up on their own screen. I know sometimes it's hard to make that out on my screen. I'll see if I can make it a little bit bigger. There we go.
And Matt, if I could, and
go ahead.
I'll have Alex weigh in on this one too, but I believe this was a follow-up communications the Archdiocese put out after the original letter that the bishop put out. That's a little bit more tempered than his original one. Is that right, Alex? Did you get a chance to take a look at this?
Not quite. No. This was the one and only public announcement of this subject. This came out on Spy Wednesday, but the original discussion was held in a private meeting with priests on April 8th. Of course, something of this magnitude couldn't be kept secret for very long, so it became relatively public knowledge after that.
So let me just read the first little bit of this, and then we can kind of break it down. So, and it's unsigned. you would think that it would be signed by, I forget the name of your Archbishop there, Weissenberger, who's new. Right? He's only been there since what, February, right?
No, not even that. I think he was installed in the middle of March, something
Yeah, it was
like
March.
March.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So he's still very new, and I want to get back to him in just a moment. But this statement says, in the years following the promulgation of Traditionis Custodes in July 2021, the Archdiocese of Detroit sought to establish a pathway for the Mass celebrated according to the 1962 Missale Romanum, commonly referred to as the traditional Latin Mass. The goal was to make use of this extraordinary form of the liturgy while ensuring that the Archdiocese remained in conformity with the directives of the Holy See. Recently, Archbishop Edward Weissenberger shared the following updates to this effort in a meeting with priests of the Archdiocese, which is what Alex just mentioned. So bullet point number 1 is really what we're focusing on today. The Holy See has reserved for itself the ability to allow the traditional Latin Mass to be celebrated in parish churches. Local bishops no longer possess the ability to permit this particular liturgy in a parish church. We're also going to come back to that point because we definitely need to challenge that, challenge the whole legitimacy of all of this. Traditionis Custodes, the 2023 rescript, and all of this stuff. So it says, with this in mind, the prior permissions to celebrate this liturgy in archdiocesan parish churches, which expire on July 1st, 2025, cannot be renewed. So if I understand this correctly, as of July 1st of this year, there will be no more traditional masses in parish churches, or has that already happened, Alex?
No, they're continuing. They will continue through June 30th.
Okay. So, and it's weird to me that it says they expire on July 1st. I mean, I know everything has, like, the Dicastery for Divine Worship has become the clearinghouse for all of these permissions, but I also attend a diocesan Latin Mass in the Archdiocese of Denver, and our priests have told us, pretty much we can just continue, keep on keeping on. They haven't heard that it's going to be canceled. So it's interesting to me that apparently the Archdiocese of Detroit has been given this expiration date, because that's not the case for me.
Well, the reason for this date is prior to this new archbishop, the previous archbishop asked priests and parishes to submit letters of request to offer the traditional Mass, and they were granted permissions that renewed every year on July 1st.
Oh, okay.
So it was more of a procedural thing. File the request. I don't know of anybody who was denied. Everybody got their permission, but everybody had to reapply every year.
I see.
Yeah, and Alex, if I could ask, sorry to interrupt, Matt, but
not at all.
Wanted to couple of things I remember from when I covered this story almost 2 years ago to today, actually, was that I believe the Archdiocese had, if you talk about parish and shrines and non-parish settings, including the Institute of Christ the King, I believe I used to think that Arlington and Charlotte had the most, where they had more than 20 locations. They weren't always every Sunday, but Arlington, Virginia, and Charlotte had 20 plus. I believe Detroit was 30 or 40 plus locations, correct?
Yeah. Well, when you include the other dioceses that comprise Metro Detroit, we were always at around 40. Sometimes it was 39, sometimes it was 41. But strictly speaking, the Archdiocese of Detroit, which is the most central part of Metro Detroit, there are 28 sites.
Okay.
I maintain a weekly newsletter that gets sent out to Latin Mass sites. That in the most recent update of my list was in August of 2022, and the count there was 28 in the Archdiocese.
And then just one other thing from a numbers perspective, this, I thought I had it in the story because I went back and looked at the story that I wrote, but maybe it was something you and I discussed during the interview. I believe, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that you said that it's maybe the wider metropolitan, outside of just the Detroit area. What is it? Windsor and Detroit, right? Is that right?
Windsor is Canada. That's right across the river from Detroit. That's where the TLM started.
I think you said there were close to, you can say more than 90 or close to 100, but basically more than 90 priests that had permission to say the traditional Latin Mass. Is that correct?
About 93 or 95 priests. Yes.
That absolutely bowled me over that was the case, but that's That's
Well,
phenomenal.
that's after a lot of hard work and
That's
many,
phenomenal.
many years.
Yes.
We have a great team here.
Yes.
Well, there's a human side to this crackdown too,
Sure.
that you have the morale of a team of priests and lay people
Right.
too.
Right. So this update says, again, the Holy See has reserved for itself the ability to allow the traditional Latin Mass to be celebrated in parish churches. What is that referring to? Well, first, ultimately, it's referring to Article 3, Section 2 of Traditionis Custodes, which says the bishop of the diocese in which until now there exist one or more groups that celebrate according to the missal antecedent to the reform of 1970. Section 2 says the bishop is to designate one or more locations where the faithful adherents of these groups may gather for the Eucharistic celebration. And then it says in parentheses, not, however, in the parochial churches and without the erection of new personal parishes, which would be like a priestly fraternity parish. And that was really the whole point of Traditionis Custodes, was essentially the enemies of tradition, the modernists, whatever you want to call them, were terrified that after Summorum Pontificum in 2007 with Benedict XVI, the traditional mass spread like wildfire throughout the church, throughout the ordinary Catholic lay faithful. They started getting exposed to it. They started falling in love with it, and that terrified them. So the whole point of Traditionis Custodes was to try and get the traditional mass, the traditional rites of the church out of the ordinary parish life, where it had experienced this resurgence since 2007.
Back to the ghettos, as I've heard priests say.
Exactly. Or if you want to use a COVID analogy, they're trying to quarantine the traditional mass and keep Catholics from getting infected by traditions, so to speak.
Thanks for that memory, Matt. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I couldn't resist that. So, and then what the second thing it's talking about, local bishops no longer possess the ability to permit this particular liturgy in a parish church. What that's referring to is in 2023, because right after Traditionis Custodes, a lot of bishops started invoking Canon 87, Section 1 of the Code of Canon Law to dispense their dioceses, their faithful, from this tyrannical law. Canon 87, Section 1 says, a diocesan bishop, whenever he judges that it contributes to their spiritual good, is able to dispense the faithful from universal and particular disciplinary laws issued for his territory or his subjects by the supreme authority of the church. And that's essentially what Traditionis Custodes is. It's a disciplinary law. It goes on to say, he is not able to dispense, however, from procedural or penal laws, nor from those whose dispensation is specially reserved to the Apostolic See or some other authority. So over time, as Francis and specifically Cardinal Roche, maybe appropriately named, the head of the dicastery for divine worship under Francis, they started realizing that bishops were invoking Canon 87, and that their plan wasn't going as they wanted it. The traditional mass was staying in parishes. So he issued this rescript in 2013, which said, no, bishops, you can't invoke Canon 87 anymore. We are reserving this disciplinary law, Traditionis Custodes, to the Apostolic See, to the Holy See. So trying to put a clamp down on it and eliminate that loophole so that bishops had to comply.
Yeah, the other important thing in that rescript also was that Traditionis Custodes, and again, it's been quite a while since I've read it, didn't really talk about anything other than the Mass. The rescript went after all the other sacraments as well, with regard to celebrating, not being able to celebrate the traditional sacraments, not just the Mass.
Right. Yep. Actually, I have the rescript pulled up right here. Let me see if I can share it on the screen so people can see what I'm talking about here. So this was issued by Cardinal Arthur Roche in February 20th, 2023. So I don't think you guys can see that yet. Hang on, let me add it. Here we go. So it says the Holy Father. There we go. The Holy Father, in the audience granted in February 20th to the undersigned Cardinal Prefect, has confirmed the following regarding the implementation of Traditionis Custodes. These dispensations are reserved in a special way to the Apostolic See. And as you can see, he cites Canon 87, Section 1, which I just read for you. So both of these things are reserved to the Apostolic See. The use of a parish church or the erection of a personal parish, which would be like, so in other words, any bishop, any diocesan bishop has to ask permission from Rome to establish a new priestly fraternity parish, for example. I assume that's what that means. I don't know what else it could mean. And then number two, the granting of permission of priests ordained after Traditionis Custodes to celebrate the traditional Mass. That's the other part of Traditionis Custodes. They want to try and keep the traditional Mass away from seminarians who are interested in it. And I think the younger ones are more and more getting very interested in it. Because they, and I, like I said before we went live, maybe we can address this subject. Why some people wonder, especially more like mainstream ordinary Catholics in the pew, why are you traditionalists? Why do you care so much about this particular form of the Mass? Isn't the Mass the Mass? Why does it matter? What do you guys say?
Well, it expresses the fullness of the Catholic faith in a particularly convincing, articulate way, perhaps better than any academic treatise could. Right. So if you're afraid of this Mass, you probably are afraid of elements of the comprehensive Catholic faith.
I just add kind of a personal reflection. I grew up near Rockford, Illinois, the birthplace and home of tan books for years and years and years. Mm-hmm. Never knew anything about them at all whatsoever. And grew up in the banners and butterflies of the 70s and 80s. After moving to where I live now in South Carolina 30 plus years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years, something like that, 3 or 4 or 5 years after moving here, I ended up being taken to a priestly fraternity to St. Peter Latin Mass by a seminarian friend of mine who is now a pastor in our diocese. And, I wasn't particularly, I always went to Mass on Sundays, but my wife and I didn't really understand the importance of confession and all the rest of these things. And when we got done with that and came back, I'm pretty sure it was a high Mass, sat in the front. He handed me his missal to take back with me. And I remember saying to him in the car, the first thing I said was, and I wasn't trying to be theological, I said, that's not the same religion that I grew up with. So that's a longer way of expressing what you just said. And he smiled and nodded his head. And I probably was speaking on two different parallels there without knowing it. But it was not the religion I grew up with. I said, this is a totally different religion. So anyway.
And that jogged my memory. I wanted you to share, because I think you mentioned this in an article for CFN sometime last year. You had your granddaughter, I think it was, one of your grandchildren asked you a particularly poignant question, like out of the mouth of babes. Why are they doing this? Something like that.
Two of them I interviewed. I think it was when they were in the Raleigh diocese and when they were shutting down everything in the Raleigh diocese except for where they used to live. They're actually about a mile away from us and going to Latin Mass with us every day. My 8 of my grandchildren from my oldest son, and they're going every single day. And I will say their faith is, over the last 6 months, just I can tell is exploding. But yeah, she asked why do the Pope and the bishops hate the Latin Mass? Why do they not like the Latin Mass? And how are you going to, 11 years old and 12 or 13 years old, how are you going to explain that? They've got catechesis, but I'll say I haven't, and certainly my oldest son has not done apologetics at all against the Novus Ordo. That's just them having attended both places and having done it more frequently than most people. And now they have an opportunity to do it daily. I'm leaving today. We've got a noon Latin Mass at our parish because we're one of the few, like you, Matt, one of the few parishes that still have the traditional Latin Mass in the parish. Most likely because in South Carolina we don't have shrines and other buildings and things like that. So we've been able to keep ours, and we have it daily. Most, during the summer, sometimes not, but we've got 2 priests who say it, and we have it daily. So, but yeah, she just, I didn't coach her or anything. She just asked, why do they hate this?
I think that innocent, pious question really encapsulates the last 60 years of crisis in the church. Like why? And the only reasonable answer is, as Alex said earlier, they must have something against the faith, because that's what the Mass expresses. Lex orandi, lex credendi, lex vivendi.
Wasn't it Cardinal Roach that admitted that in an interview with BBC maybe a couple years ago? Didn't he have an interview with BBC and basically said that the post-conciliar church, that the Mass does not represent the faith of the post-conciliar church? He said something like that, like out and out. the things that we were not allowed to say under the first motu proprio, that the face is different. I believe wrote said that in an interview.
Yeah, he basically said the quiet part out loud. And even
Yes.
Francis, actually, I wrote an article about this for CFN. Several articles actually. I'll post one in the live chat so people can read it if they're interested. But in 2024, there was like mid 2024, there was talk about on Rorate Caeli about a so-called final solution for the traditional mass being murmured about at that time.
Right.
And I wrote an article saying, I think a final solution seems probable, that they're going to try and get rid of the traditional mass altogether for two main reasons. One of which is in June of 2022, Francis issued an apostolic letter called Desiderio Desideravi, which was basically an apologetic piece for trying a defense of Traditionis Custodes and the liturgical reforms of the last several decades. And he said in that document, quote, "It would be trivial to read the tensions unfortunately present around the celebration." In other words, those who are in favor of the traditional mass, those who oppose it. He said it would be trivial to read those tensions as a simple divergence between different tastes concerning a particular ritual form. The problematic, he said, is primarily ecclesiological. So that's a huge claim. He's saying that
Yep.
the tensions which exist between Catholics who embrace the liturgical reform and those who resist it are not based on quote unquote different tastes, but on divergent ecclesiologies. That is, on fundamentally different doctrinal positions about the church's very nature, which is what the object.
Some of us agree with that. And then under the first motu proprio, you are not allowed to express that. And
Right.
You were not allowed to express
Right.
anything of what he just said. So from that perspective, yeah. And then you've got that. And again, I've got Matt, I told you the letter from well, actually the first one from Pope John Paul II. He says, however, from Ecclesia Dei Afflicta, however, it is necessary all pastors and other faithful have a new awareness, not only of the lawfulness, but also of the riches for the church of a diversity of charisms, traditions of spirituality and apostolate, which constitutes the beauty of unity and variety, etc. So,
So
kind of the opposite.
To get back to our main topic about the situation in Detroit, I wanted to ask Alex. So you said this update was issued by the Archdiocese in mid-April, I think during Holy Week, you mentioned is when it was published. So since then, what has been the reaction of traditional Catholics in Detroit, and what has been the reaction of the Archbishop? Has he gotten some blowback from this? What are you seeing?
Well, I think Catholics were originally very concerned, but of course the passing of the Holy Father introduces another possible change into this situation. So I really can't predict what's going to happen over the next few weeks. If I were to place a bet, I'd probably say, wait to see who the new Holy Father is, and then the Archbishop might change his mind. What I can tell you is that things are starting to ramp down. The parish sites are starting to realize they're going to have to come to an end unless something changes in June. Now, the good thing is we have many, many historic chapels and non-parish churches here. In fact, I write this column, the Tridentine Community News. It comes out every week, and if somebody's interested, they can go to DetroitLatinMass.org, and you can see all the history of that column. A while ago, I published a 5-part series on the non-parish churches and chapels in this region. So we would have more than enough beautiful sites to go to. In fact, 2 of them already host the TLM. One thing that concerns us here is, why is the Archbishop saying we can only have 1 non-parish church site per region? And there are 4 regions in the diocese. So that would mean 4 sites, or maybe 3 or 4 sites, because it's not clear if the downtown region has a second site in addition to the Institute of the Christ King parish. So with all these chapels, we could theoretically still have 20 odd sites, but no, that's not being offered to us. It's a crackdown to just one site per each of the 4 regions.
Yeah, without the you guys have the Institute of Christ King in one place or 2 different places?
One place.
One location. Is that the one that was cited in that New York Times article about having almost 700 people attended on Sundays? So and again, this is just a brief observation. Mm-hmm. So if he's narrowing it down to 4, that's almost identical to what happened in Arlington, Virginia, and what happened in Charlotte Diocese, where it's just 1 per whatever they decide, the region or, of that. And, expect everybody to get off and get in their cars and drive to those locations, I guess. I mean, that's very, very similar, though, as far as what Arlington and Charlotte did. So, and
of course, with the other dioceses here, not unlike Arlington, we have the other dioceses in proximity. Yep. So some people are going to go to the neighboring diocese for Mass. So even with that, so we'll have maybe 10 sites. So it's not horrendous, but it's not convenient. And some of the Mass sites are really remote. There are some churches in remote suburbs, exurbs, which have no alternative site within a 45-minute drive.
Which could be by design, unfortunately.
Could be.
You never know. And that brings me to another question I had for Alex is regarding Archbishop Weissenberger. I don't know the man. I know nothing about him. But I did pick up in the statement where he says he kind of seems to be trying, or whoever wrote this is trying to put him into the light of, well, he really wants to be pastoral and do whatever he possibly can, but his hands are tied. The Holy See is reserved for itself the ability to allow the traditional Mass, and local bishops no longer possess the ability. So it's kind of like, well, what can I do? Kind of like, it's not really my fault. But do you get the sense that he is in favor of the traditional Mass, or he would rather not have it?
I don't think it's an issue that matters much to him, and I think he's sincere when he's saying that he believes the law ties his hands. I don't want to read any more into it than there is, and that gets to the issue of is this law is an unfortunate law to begin with. So you're putting bishops for whom this is not a central subject to them. You're putting them in a bad position.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And if we go back to the Second Vatican Council, one of the things that they say was very important was that it finalized Vatican I. And when I asked the question, or when I researched, okay, like what? And, Vatican I was preeminently about papal infallibility. Vatican II talked about the power and the authority of the bishops themselves, that the bishops were not, the first bishops were not ordained by St. Peter or consecrated by St. Peter. It was by Jesus Christ himself. So the whole point of the Vatican II on that aspect was the bishops being able to use and wield more authority without always having to go to the Holy See for every single decision, just like that canon, that you read, Matt, talked about with reserving to the bishops. And again, if we want to have true ecumenism, I'm getting off topic, but true ecumenism with the Orthodox, I'm sure we'd be all for doing that. By allowing them to continue their traditions and all the rest of the stuff. The Pope's not going to go in and say to the Byzantines they can't celebrate their divine worship with their divine liturgy using their right.
That would be that would be tyranny, and they would be right to resist that. Yes. So maybe that's a good segue into another aspect of this whole issue that I'd like to discuss, and really get back to challenging the base premise that Traditionis Custodes is a legitimate law in the first place, which I don't think it is. In 2020, let me see here, 2021, I think it was. That was a big year at the Catholic Identity Conference. There were 2 outstanding lectures given that year. One by Diane Montagna that I want to get to in just a second, but the other one eventually became this booklet by Dr. Peter Kwasniewski, True Obedience in the Church, a guide to discernment in challenging times. And there were two statements that I want to share from this outstanding lecture. He got a couple of literally standing ovations at that conference. I had the privilege of being there in the front row, being able to listen to him and Diane speak. So he goes into great length describing, the nature of true obedience and distinguishing it from false. Kind of like there's St. Louis de Montfort and true devotion to Mary. He distinguishes true devotion from false devotions, that kind of thing. So he says in this section called "The Pope Who Sets Himself Against the Common Good," and he describes what is the common good of the Church. And then he goes on to say, Since the liturgy truly is the font and apex of the Christian life, and I think that's a quote from Sacrosanctum Concilium, I forget which article number, the home of divine revelation and the primary agent of our transformation in Christ, since that is the case, it follows that to abolish or prohibit or in any way work against the venerable Roman rite that was humbly received, gratefully loved, and lavishly praised for century after century of uninterrupted growth, that is the most notorious and damaging attack on the common good possible or imaginable. If this is not the kind of good the Church's authority exists to protect, one may well ask what goods would qualify. As a statement from the Society of St. Pius X argues, and this was published right after Traditionis Custodes, quote, the traditional Mass belongs to the most intimate part of the common good in the Church. Restricting it, pushing it into ghettos, and ultimately planning its demise can have no legitimacy. This law is not a law of the Church, because, as St. Thomas Aquinas says, a law against the common good is no valid law. End quote. What do you guys think?
Well, I would just throw in that I was speaking probably 2 years ago with a fairly eminent canon lawyer priest who made pretty much that exact same argument, Matt. Mm-hmm. He said this is Traditionis Custodes is a flawed piece of legislation. It could have holes poked through it. It's just bad law. So right. I think if somebody like that is of that opinion, we're not alone thinking that. But the counterpart to that line of thinking, though, is, and especially in the Archdiocese of Detroit, I know 3 priests, at least off the top of my head, who have been punished in their ministry and sidelined for very small issues. Mm-hmm. So to say that this is a flawed law when people are being disciplined for very minor transgressions means that we're operating in a different world. We have to realize the bishop can do many, many things to make a priest's life difficult. Right. And so I don't like it when I read online, people say, well, you need to resist this or resist that. Right. Well, yeah, but the bishop is still in charge. He can still destroy a priest's life.
And what does that mean when people say that? I mean, I think it's lay people obviously feeling and thinking they have very little authority with regard to these things. I mean, canon law does give us rights, and we can. I'm sure you've done many times, Alex. I mean, I was originally involved in the original petition in the mid and late 90s for what eventually we ended up having the Latin Mass for a month and stuff like that, and then following all those little tittle rules that they had for us back then. So the whole idea of stand up and resist. I mean, probably the way that we want to do it and the way that most people want to do it when they're, and I'm not making fun of any of the online things, but with the way that they're expressing it on social media outlets is probably not the way to do the, sweetness and charity and with the truth is, as St. Francis de Sales said, that's probably not the way. So my thing is, I think that it's more in the hands of the lay people, just like it was before, after when the first motu proprio came from John Paul II, to reasonably sort these things out and work it, because you're right. I mean, if the priest decides he's going to just say the Latin Mass, even clandestinely, even if he's going to say a private Mass and people are going to come, that's going to get out. It's going to get out. And even though he's doing nothing wrong, because he can celebrate that Mass anytime he wants from a private Mass, that word's going to get out, and then he's going to be gone, and then what? I mean, that's the whole. Right. You're right. I mean, on that aspect, that's right. Matt, I mean, the way I'd answer the question about whether it's a legitimate law. I mean, look, there's a whole lot of things that are probably within the church and outside the church, whether something's an illegitimate law. I mean, John Paul II said that we had a duty as lay people to resist euthanasia and abortion, that we had a duty to do that, to do something to reduce, because they were unjust laws, from the civil perspective. But so if they're saying they're going to try to, obviously they can, they talk about we can regulate. Anytime I bring this up, one of my priest friends says, yeah, but it doesn't mean we can't regulate the liturgy, or we can't regulate the time of the liturgy and these things. Well, okay, from the letter of Pope Benedict XVI, he says, as for, there's really, really good stuff in the letter, but this one, as for the use of the 1962 Missal as the extraordinary form of the liturgy of the Mass, I would like to draw attention to the fact this Missal was never juridically abrogated and consequently, in principle, was always permitted. Still doesn't mean those priests didn't get outed, didn't, be called schismatic and things like that. But I mean, it suddenly can't be, he talked about how you can't just suddenly get rid of something that was the highest form of worship in the church and ban it, right? So that's where we are. I mean, that'd be the way I'd answer. I'd answer it with the previous two popes and all the magisterium before that. I mean, that's
right. Yeah, and I should clarify. I certainly didn't mean to imply that I think priests, like I understand there, a lot of them, most of them, if not the vast majority of them, are in very difficult situations because they don't have the backing of their bishop. And even if the bishop is sympathetic, he himself is not willing to stand up to the Pope and say, this is wrong. And that's what ultimately we need.
Correct.
The first line of defense should be the bishops standing up to the Pope and saying, with all due respect, Holy Father, this is illegitimate. You don't have the authority to do this. You are not, as Benedict XVI said, you are not an absolute monarch whose thoughts and desires are the law.
Right.
That's not what the papacy is.
Well, and the other side of that too is, and maybe Roche contacted these bishops. And I'm thinking, I know they did Charlotte because they knew the Charlotte diocese, the Latin Mass was being celebrated in the seminary there that was growing in Charlotte, and they knew that was happening. So I know he contacted the previous bishop, not the current one that they just installed. But every bishop didn't need to go out of his way to go ask every single little tittle of what Cardinal Roche wanted with regard to this thing. And some of them did not. And, I'm not going to give them the details of my own diocese, but here we are an hour and a half from Charlotte, and we have 4 different locations, I think 4 or 5 different locations, Charlotte or Greenville, South Carolina, Columbia, and 2 in the Charleston area. And they're the 3 metropolitan areas. And I know the previous bishop and the current bishop never went to the Holy Father and asked him what to do with this. I know that didn't happen. And I hope they don't.
No, that was very wise on their part.
I know they didn't do that.
If you're going to, Cardinal Roche is very overt in his hatred of the traditional Mass.
Yes.
So if you're going to go ask him to like micromanage your situation in your diocese, you know what he's going to do. He's going to try to stamp it out. So definitely don't go to him.
Well, and especially in a place that might have almost 100 priests that are authorized to celebrate the Latin Mass. That, to me, that just, I couldn't believe. I mean, in a good way, I thought that's phenomenal. I mean, that's absolutely phenomenal. You've got that many, and again, you've got lots of great historic church buildings too, right? I mean, that's
another heartbreaking part to this, that we have about 60 historic churches and probably another 30 historic chapels. To see so many of them, like the one you saw in the New York Times article, Sweetest Heart of Mary, gorgeous church. My personal favorite, Old St. Mary's, downtown Detroit, amazing church. To see the traditional Mass being taken away from such ideal settings is bad. And it's not only is it bad aesthetically and liturgically and in those ways, but it's also bad financially for these parishes.
Yep. Right. Yep.
In some of these parishes, the traditional Mass gets more attendance and collection than there are other weekend Masses combined.
Yeah, and I think initially, before the Institute of Christ the King spread, they were doing that a lot. And I mean, I know in Rockford, Illinois, where the downtown's kind of, it's an old manufacturing city that doesn't exactly have people coming into it and driving there anymore. They've restored. It's not perfect, but over the 30 years or 25 years they've been there, they've restored that building right in the midst of the heart of the town. And people drive from all around that area to go and, maybe not to the numbers that the Detroit Institute of Christ the King and stuff like that, but they've done a lot, redone all the stained glass windows. Just by that self, that's a lot of money doing that sort of thing. So I think the Institute's kind of made its name for doing that along, for various places as well, I think. So
I think if I remember right, the update mentions the second bullet point says the Ministry of St. Joseph's Shrine in Detroit, functioning specifically to care for Christ's faithful who desire the traditional Mass. And since 2016, this community has been under the care of the Institute of Christ the King. And so that nothing will be interrupted there, as I understand it. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
So I had one of our viewers, I'll put this comment up on the screen. They ask if we have any thoughts on the success of the ICKSP locations, or drawing the attention of these bishops as recent changes in Oakland Apostolate, St. Margaret Mary, and now Detroit. So I don't know if you guys have any insight into those locations?
I mean, the only negative one I know is the Chicago. They were kicked out of their headquarters in Chicago, and they haven't been back.
Right.
In the downtown
I remember
Chicago.
that.
Yes. Yep.
But
well,
yeah,
in this case, there's nothing negative with regards to the Institute. Archbishop Weisenberger had a relationship with them in his previous Diocese of Tucson, so he felt comfortable with them, and it's just going to continue.
Right. Here's somebody in the comments who says, I attend St. Mary's of Redford. The numbers vary from week to week, from 40 to sometimes over 100. What is amazing is the number of young people. And I think that's the case everywhere. The traditional Mass. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this. This person brought this comment up, because St. Mary's of Redford was at one time in the 1960s the largest parish in the Archdiocese of Detroit. The neighborhood in which it resides is not a good neighborhood. It's really devoid of life nowadays, and the parish was threatened with closure because so few people were going there. But a energetic young priest took over the parish, made the Latin Mass one of the key elements of the parish, and as this person points out, it's revitalized the place. So
it's amazing. It's amazing to see that effect.
Which is what we were supposed to do, right? I mean, from a bigger perspective, we know that the flight of the cities to the suburbs involved a lot of Catholics, and when bishops go and shut them down, and again, I'm not in the state where I need to worry about hundreds of millions or tens of millions of dollars and things of that nature. But isn't the church's primary goal, and supposedly the Second Vatican Council, evangelization? Why did we not evangelize the people that were there in those places? Which I know the Institute of Christ the King in Chicago was doing. It was growing, and it wasn't just, it wasn't the Catholics that were born and bred there. It was others and new people coming in. I've seen that at Society of St. Pius X Chapel up in Charlotte and other places where they're evangelizing where they are, rather than saying, the middle income and middle upper class flew to the suburbs and Sunday we have to shut down. Well, what about the evangelization? What'd you guys do evangelizing?
Here's another great comment to that effect. Somebody says, I've never seen more pregnant women in one place in my life than in the TLM. Shouldn't a growing church be the goal? Yes, absolutely.
Yep.
All right. Well, I know we're getting a little short on time. I wanted to, obviously the conclave is going to begin on Wednesday, and we'll all have that in mind and certainly in our prayers. So there is one connection between our story today and the conclave, and that is there are two false pretexts that Francis gave in his letter to the bishops accompanying Traditionis Custodes, basically explaining why he was doing what he did. Just like Benedict issued a letter to bishops in 2007 explaining Summorum Pontificum, Francis did the same thing. So the first one that I'll mention, the false pretext, is he basically claimed that he was doing the same thing, and Paul VI after Vatican II was doing the same thing that Pius V did, whose feast day is today, after the Council of Trent, which is exactly, Pius V did the exact opposite after Trent. After Trent, the council called for basically a restoration and codification of the ancient rite of the Mass according to the Roman Church. So Pius V established a commission to restore the rite according to the tradition of the Holy Fathers, as he said in Quo Primum in 1570, and he was eliminating novelties. That was the whole purpose of Quo Primum, was to get rid of local novelties that had sprung up in more recent times, and to standardize the Mass into the ancient form, and so that all the priests throughout Christendom were saying the Mass according to the same rite.
And allowed all of them that were in existence for 200 or more years to continue too.
Right, exactly.
Yes. Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
So, but with Traditionis Custodes and really with the liturgical reform in general, you see the exact opposite. It was Paul VI and then later Francis trying to force a novel rite, which Benedict XVI once called a banal, on-the-spot product on the entire church, and trying to get rid of tradition. So that's false pretext number one. The second false pretext that he mentions in this letter is something that Diane Montagna exposed and really obliterated in her 2021 Catholic Identity Conference speech, which I was there for. It was great to hear it in person. So he said he issued a questionnaire to the bishops regarding the implementation of Summorum Pontificum. And Francis said, the responses reveal a situation that preoccupies and saddens me and persuades me of the need to intervene. Well, what he didn't say, which is what Diane talked about in 2021, is that there were plenty of positive responses to that questionnaire. They were just papered over and kind of dismissed. And the focus was solely on some of the negative answers. I'm going to put a link to her 2021. The full transcript is available from the Remnant website. Michael Matt is the one who hosts the CIC every year. So I just put a link if anybody who wants to read that. But she talked about she
got these directly from the bishops, right? Bishops gave these to her, right? I mean,
she has seen the other thing is that the results, the full results of the questionnaire have never actually been published.
Right.
But she was able to obtain a large portion of the responses and was able to share some of the positive responses. Basically, a lot of bishops at the time were just saying, we're fine with the status quo. We think Summorum Pontificum is going well. Just leave it alone. Don't do anything with it. But there were, this is the connection to the conclave. There were 3 cardinals in particular that she names who were trying to, engineer this process in order to get rid of the traditional mass. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, Cardinal Mark Ouellet, and Cardinal, I forget his first name, Cardinal Giuseppe Versaldi. So Parolin, of course, was Francis's Secretary of State. Cardinal Mark Ouellet, at the time, was prefect of the Congregation for Bishops. And all of these men, by the way, since the death of the Pope, are no longer in office. Their term of office ceases when the Pope dies. And then finally, Cardinal Versaldi was prefect of the Congregation for Catholic Education. And she said in her speech, according to reliable sources, Cardinal Parolin, Cardinal Ouellet, and Cardinal Versaldi were leading the discussion and piloting it in a definite direction. And that direction was basically to say, something needs to be done about the spread of the traditional mass.
I think it was her articles too. It might've been somewhere else where she basically talked about they had the direction and the documents written up and given to the Holy Father before they even saw all the results.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly. That it was before they even saw all the results from the input of the bishops, correct?
The questionnaire was basically just to give the appearance, kind of like this whole synodality. Like they already have it worked out what they want, what they're going to accomplish beforehand.
Right.
The meetings just kind of give it a superficial appearance of involving everybody and being like this democratic process, but they're going to do what they're going to do. Yeah. So. But interestingly, these cardinals, I know 2 of the 3 of them, Parolin and Ouellet, are listed on this website that Diane is the executive director of, and she works closely with Edward Penton, a veteran Vatican journalist as well. Let me share this on the screen. This is called, and I had the privilege of interviewing Ed last week on the channel about the conclave. So for folks who haven't seen that yet, definitely give it a watch. It's a good conversation. So this is the website collegeofcardinalsreport.com, and I've clicked on the tab where they stand, and it's a very user-friendly site. They have all of these different filters you can go by, and I'm going to click on the papabili. So these are the 22 cardinals that Edward Penton, Diane Montagna, and their team of journalists have determined have a decent chance of being elected the Pope. And one of the, this where they stand, they have 10 different issues, I think. The 4th of which is where they stand on restricting the old Latin Mass. So it's interesting to kind of look here and see, like Cardinal Burke, for example, is obviously against restricting the old Latin Mass. So apparently is Cardinal Bustillo. I'm not familiar with him, or Bustillo, excuse me. And then you have some of them like Cardinal Ejik, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's unknown where he stands because apparently he's never said anything publicly. But then we have others like Cardinal Pietro Parolin, for example, is one of the papabili, and he is in favor. He has made it clear in private that he is firmly opposed to the traditional liturgy. He reportedly played a key role in the creation of Traditionis Custodes, and that actually links to some of Diane's reporting from maybe a year or two ago. I can't remember exactly, but going over what we just discussed here. And I thought that Cardinal Ouellet, I think maybe he might have been papabile at some point, but isn't currently. So just an interesting site. The other issues that they cover, for example, are like ordaining female deacons, where the papabile stand on that issue, blessing same-sex couples, making priestly celibacy optional, the Vatican China secret accords, and then there's these other 5 as well. So that's another excellent resource as we're approaching the conclave. But I think as we wrap up, I mean, the most important thing that all of us can do is certainly be praying. Cardinal Burke has been leading a novena prayer every day, specifically related to seeking the intercession of Our Lady under her title, Our Lady of Guadalupe, in light of the shrine that he had built up in Wisconsin. Bishop Athanasius Schneider also has a wonderful prayer that he's published. And actually, see if I have it. Yeah, I just got this in the mail a couple days ago, actually. His new booklet, Salve Regina, from Sophia Institute Press, A Rosary Crusade to Plead for Holy Popes. And it has the prayer that I assume he composed, Prayer to Plead for Holy Popes, in here. I have this posted on my Twitter or X account, as well as Facebook. And also Father Chad Ripperger has a good prayer out there as well that I've put out. Any final thoughts, gentlemen, before we wrap up?
Well, I would just say that to anybody in a similar situation as Detroit is right now, that you've got to be ready to pounce on the positives, which may be around the corner. We don't know that. Perhaps we will get a Holy Father who will support this particular cause. Get ready to move. I remember when Summorum Pontificum came out, the Archdiocese of Detroit had one TLM site at that point, and literally overnight we went to 7 sites. Seven sites because there were other people. There was such built up momentum that people were just ready to go. The volunteers were lined up, the musicians were lined up, ready to go. The same thing could happen again. So don't let a setback discourage you in your diocese from building up your resources for that day. And I believe that day will come when we will have this opportunity again. So don't lose hope. Keep organizing, keep getting your act together, keep lining up your teams.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts, Brian?
Yeah, I agree with what Alex said, because there's a lot of people that like to, as I found out in the 90s, we had 3 or 4 or 5 people that were really, really interested, and we kind of all drove, getting the petitions, talking to priests. Back then I didn't know if it was ever going to happen. Anyway, but I would say not only be prepared, but also prepare to do what you're supposed to do I'm presuming we're all, married with children here. I don't know, Alex, but anyway, one way or the other, do our state in life, and our state in life as fathers and husbands is to pass the faith on to our children. And now for me, now that they're nearby, my grandchildren as well. I am not saying that only people who go to Latin Mass are going to stay Catholic, but I have 4 younger brothers. We all grew up in the 70s and 80s, 90s, then Banner and Butterflies, up near Cardinal Bernardine's diocese. It wasn't, but he had inflect. I wasn't in that, but he had a huge effect back then. None of us were ever asked to be altar boys. My wife, now she'll get mad at me and say, my wife was an altar girl back in the day, back in the 70s. And my sons are aghast. They can't believe that. And it's our job to pass on the faith. And so far, so good. I've got 7 children. All are still practicing the faith. I'm not going to say it's because of me, but that's kind of that's been our primary thing, why we started homeschooling and everything else. It's to pass on the faith. And it's great to have strong wives and strong women helping to do a lot of this, and sometimes driving this stuff as well. But as husbands and fathers, it's our jobs to pass on the faith to our children. And I don't know a better way of doing that by having regular access to the Latin Mass.
Very well said. Thank you both again so much for joining me today. I think this was a great discussion. Hopefully it's been edifying for our listeners. We have close to 300 people joining us live right now. So thank you to everybody who's with us live. If you enjoyed the conversation, please do like the video and make sure to subscribe to this new channel. Hopefully it'll continue to grow. Hopefully I can have you guys back on sometime to continue discussing these issues. Hopefully we'll be able to share with you great news that a pope favorable to the traditional mass has been elected in the coming days and weeks. That will be certainly exciting.
And his first act will be to free it.
That's right. That would be amazing.
We can pray for that.
That's right. But even, I've talked about this with Father Charles Murr and Edward Penton last week. Like, even if that doesn't happen, we have to also be ready, brace ourselves for the prospect of getting a Francis 2.0 or something similar to that. We don't know what's going to happen,
right.
But we have to remember that, for those who love God, all things work together for good. Just like during the Francis pontificate, really there was a strengthening in many ways and a resurgence of the traditional movement, because it just grows under persecution, just like the church in general. The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church,
right.
as Tertullian said, I think in this, 2nd or 3rd century. So something good will come one way or another in God's time. So thank you again for joining me. I'm actually going to be back in about an hour and a half with the author of this book, The Dictator Pope, Henry Sire. Looking forward to that conversation, get his take on Francis's legacy and the path forward. So if you're able to join me for that, please do. And as I say, this is a new channel called Veritatis Vox, which means the voice of truth in Latin. It's based on our Lord's words in John 18:37, where he's telling Pontius Pilate, "For this I was born, for this I came into the world, to give testimony to the truth, that those who are of the truth hear my voice." So may we be those who hear the voice of Christ and know and love the truth that he came to give us. Until next time, God bless you all, Godspeed, and take care, Alex and Brian. Thank you again.
Amen. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks,
All right.
Alex.